Welcome to episode 84 of the MiamiTech pod. I'm joined today by my usual co-host, partner in crime, Maria Derchi, and we have our fortunate enough to have our guest co-host here, Elizabeth Irizarry. And today we are joined by our guest of honor, Zaid Rahman of Flexbase. Zaid, sorry.
Close enough. Yeah, it's technically correct.
Oh, really?
What you said. But yeah, my name has like 3 or 4 different pronunciations, which is really annoying. Yeah,
What's your preferred way to pronounce it? How do you introduce yourself?
Most people call me Zaid.
Zaid? Okay. All right. Well, welcome, Zaid. And we're super happy to have you today. But Zaid, why don't you give us sort of a brief background of, like who you are? Like, who is Zaid?
Sure. Yeah, where do I begin? Indian originally, grew up in Dubai, came to the US when I was like 17 and a half or so. And decided to drop out of college. It was a relevant piece of my background, and started a company in the education software space. Did that for a while, sold it, started another company at the intersection of AI and education. Actually, a lot of the stuff we did was a precursor to sort of the LLM stuff you see today, a whole other story. Pretty active investor, invest in a ton of companies at this point, over 100 portfolio companies. But the most relevant piece these days is that I'm the founder CEO of a company called Flex. It's a finance super app for business owners, where we provide credit cards, banking, payments, insurance, sort of all in one sort of finance stack for SMBs.
Now, I feel like that was a lot, but I feel like each chapter of your life we could dissect because it's incredibly fascinating. Starting with dropping out of college. You didn't do it alone. I know you were part of the Thiel Fellowship. So Can you talk to us a little bit about that experience, how you even got on their radar?
Yeah, no, it's a really fun kind of experience. For those of you who don't know the Thiel Fellowship, Peter Thiel, who of course started PayPal, first investor in Facebook, a bunch of sort of very significant companies in Silicon Valley. He started this program called the Thiel Fellowship about 12 years ago. And the impetus for the Thiel Fellowship was that Peter, being a contrarian, really does not believe in universities. In fact, he believes it so little that he started the program where he picks 20 people every year, typically under the age of 20, gives them $100,000 with one condition: you can't go to college. And so from that program, there are about 250 or so people. There have been, 3 dozen unicorns, a bunch of billionaires. The founder of Ethereum, Vitalik, is a Thiel Fellow. The founder of Figma, Dylan, is a Thiel Fellow. A bunch of kind of very influential people in the startup world have come from that program, which for him is just confirmation that all you need is great K through 12, and universities and college education in general is a distraction for society. So
how did he how were you found by Peter? Like, do you get a knock on the door, you open it, and Peter Thiel's there with a check?
So when I used to live in Dubai, so I grew up in Dubai, and in Dubai, it was fun because we didn't really have much of a startup community there, and it's sort of like you found your way on the internet. And so I one day stumbled across the Thiel Fellowship, I think reading Hacker News. This is, I think, 2012. And so as a naive, high school kid, I decided to apply to it because I liked the idea of not going to college. They actually
I'm sure that went over really well with your parents, your Indian parents.
Yeah, my parents are like super, super Indian. And so they did not appreciate that. And so the Thiel Fellowship actually flew me out to the US for the first time. I was supposed to have gone to college here, et cetera, but they flew me out before that. It's funny because initially they didn't actually give it to me. They said, "Kid, you're interesting, but not that interesting." But I decided to take a gap year from college and, work on my startup anyway. And that startup took off. And And then they called me back a couple of years later and said, hey, do you still want it? And so there's a whole story around that. And so it was sort of like a kind of a very organic thing. It turns out the fellowship has grown in popularity quite significantly. It's a pretty kind of large number of applicants every year, something like 10 to 15,000 applicants. So pretty selective program. But the idea is that they're trying to sort of find these people who want to start companies. And so they're not necessarily the most intelligent people in the world, which, I feel like the dumbest person in the room, but it's about, the right mindset, start working on things early on and, stuff will happen.
So do you think you would do the Thiel Fellowship again if you were offered it today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I would very happily go to the University of Miami right now, FIU, wherever university, anywhere in the world, and encourage kids to drop out of school and go pursue projects. In fact, I'm trying to organize a recruiting tour for that at a few universities. So I'm not saying this is for every single student listening to this, right? It's meant for the entrepreneurial kind that wants to follow a path that they want to sort of make themselves, rather than follow this kind of career trajectory, get a sort of entry job and kind of rise through the ladder and, become a manager and so on. If that career sounds very boring and kind of dreadful, then I suggest picking your own path. And the Thiel Fellowship is perhaps one way to do it.
So how much did you, I know some people took the money and traveled and did other things and eventually did end up starting a company, but did you spend it all on your company?
Yeah, it's funny because by the time I got the Thiel Fellowship, I actually didn't really need the dollars. And so it was sort of incrementally helpful, but it wasn't like life and death at that point. And oftentimes, the fellowship picks people who have already gotten a round of financing, and, it's sort of like a very selective YC almost, right? Because only like 20 or so people every year. But unlike an incubator or an accelerator, it's designed to follow the individuals through their journey, right? And so there are tons of fellows who failed the first time around, or even the second time around, and then they go and start a unicorn as their third company. And so it's sort of like a very powerful university alumni that has been historically a pretty well-kept secret.
And you don't promise any equity towards Peter for
future
businesses in this?
in fact, it's the whole thing is a nonprofit. So it's just a grant. So Peter actually has no economic incentive in your success, which actually makes it, I mean, if it were a for-profit as a VC fund, it would have been incredibly successful, but he wanted to make it as a kind of, this is not an economic thing I'm doing. This is I want to actually make something happen. And so, yeah, that's created a really good vibe in the fellowship.
Yeah, but to be clear, he got early in on Ethereum, right? Because Vitalik was probably talking to him about it. And so he was able to get Ethereum at a penny, so he's had a lucrative financial return from this. Let's not kid ourselves, right?
Yeah. So I think, I don't know what companies Peter personally invests in, but I think the kind of overarching point here is that college is not the only path, right? There are more paths out there, and startups is one. And if you want to pursue a career in research, there are plenty of fellows who are working on stuff like solving cancer, working on longevity, stuff that's not necessarily, a startup that becomes a unicorn, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just about, enterprise value. It's more about, let's go and solve really, really important problems, because Peter's kind of core thesis, if you go and listen to all the stuff he said in the last 2 decades, is that, as a society, we have stopped incrementally improving technology. Technology progression has actually slowed down since the 70s. And so the fellowship is sort of like, hey, what's the craziest idea you can start working on today, rather than, 5, 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah. So I see that at some point you were in the Bay Area and then transitioned to Miami. between all of this with the, once you were with the Thiel Fellowship. But what happened between that transition? Did anything else occur? Because I see that there's a little bit of a gap here. And then at what point did you arrive in Miami?
Yeah. So from Dubai, I moved to San Francisco. I did a couple of startups. First one was an education software company helping schools to sort of digitize their content. And then I, was lucky to have gone through a sort of a PE outcome on that. And from there, I spun out and started another education tech company, but this time at the intersection of education and AI, a company called Volley. And that company, the goal was to basically generate personalized learning materials on any topic for anybody. It was a very sort of big aspiration goal because what we wanted to build effectively is what today's LLMs, large language models are, right? We wanted to basically build an AI teacher. And in that, we were not successful. We're pretty underfunded as a startup, although we raised a bunch of money for it from folks like Mark Zuckerberg, and later on from our biggest backer was JP Morgan. And we were building tools that basically could generate summaries and learning materials from pretty much any knowledge you presented, such that it could be used in sort of a high school environment, a university environment, or even a corporate training environment. And that was sort of a fun lesson in learning how to, build sort of AI systems. It was sort of the first sort of venture-backed company that I did, and learn how to sort of recruit a lot of talent. And at peak we had something like 25 AI scientists on the team, and so it was a fun sort of time, just sort of nerding on science basically, and then sort of working on some of the stuff before it became cool. I think I'm one of the few people who worked on large language models before anyone knew what that was. Didn't work out. Mistimed it by like 4 years, but cool nevertheless.
I was going to say, you mean before it started trending and everybody was talking about AI now? Everyone's an AI. Did you miss that?
I remember going to VC pitches and like no one would understand what the fuck we were building. And so, yeah.
It's wild because like the amount of money that's like flowed into the AI and LLM space since like after you exited Volley it's incalculable almost when you think about how much the Googles of the world, Microsofts of the world, and all the VCs are dumping into this space. But
yeah, it's incredible. And honestly, like there was a period where AI was like very hot, and that was sort of like 2016, 17, and then it stopped being hot. But people who were like the real builders kept building and consistently sort of delivering results. I mean, OpenAI as a company has been around for 7 or 8 years, and for the large part of that, nobody knew what they were actually building. There was sort of a niche audience listening to their talks and like reading their archive papers and whatnot. But most people had no idea what GPT was, right, until ChatGPT. And so it's like one of those things where if you have a long-term enough vision and you actually consistently do stuff on a daily basis, stuff can happen. Yeah.
Well, they were also structured as like a nonprofit, so like all the capitalists were probably like not looking at it thinking it was a purely academic thing, and then there was that whole switcheroo to like bait and switch, depending on who you talk to turn it into a for-profit enterprise.
Yep.
So wait, now okay, you pass Volley, and now you get to my favorite topic, Flexbase. Because disclaimer, I am an investor. Florida Funders is an investor in Flexbase. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about what made you start that?
Yeah, so I started Flexbase, which started this about 2 years ago. And the impetus of starting the company was my entire family is sort of in the SMB space. So my father runs a construction business. My sisters are architects. I have family in logistics and those types of things. And so growing up, I saw up close what it was to run an SMB, and especially an SMB in a space like construction, which is so kind of outdated. I mean, if you think about construction is one of the only industries in the last 100 years where the productivity has actually gone down, which is an insane statement to make. I mean, if you think about stuff like, let me give you an example. So the Empire State Building in New York was built in a single year. same scale, Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, completed in like 2018, 2019. It took them 12 years to build it, right? So just to kind of show you how bad things have gotten. And it's not just regulations and safety, but it's also like all sorts of other issues with, the supply chain and kind of bureaucracy around management and many layers of subcontractors and those types of things. And so started looking into the space very deeply and quickly realized that there are tons of opportunities. And so we started going pretty deep in it. And the thing that everybody talked about was the thing that really is broken is actually cash flow. The finance stack around these companies are really broken. And you can use that as not just in construction, but also in stuff like logistics, trucking, farming, restaurants, pretty much any industry that's not, IT related, internet enabled, like, tech startups or large enterprises. They pretty much don't have good finance stacks. And so there were two insights. The first was, if you think about finance at these companies, there are just so many different tools that you have to use, right? You have tons of corporate card companies, expense management, banking, credit cards, and you have stuff like QuickBooks and insurance and payroll and benefits. And the other kind of big thing was that most of these business owners just don't have the time, and in certain cases, the know-how to actually put together the right finance stack. And so we thought it would be a great opportunity and sort of kind of a no-brainer solution to consolidate every single aspect of the finance back office into one platform. And so we've basically launched a product that provides credit, banking, payments, and insurance to SMBs.
So what do you think of as like, where is this going to be in 5 years? Like, what are you hoping like to swing for? Like, what's the big goal of this?
Yeah. So I think zooming out, there's this really powerful notion around treating the dollar that the business owner makes as sort of the underlying common denominator across all the products we're building, where there's an opportunity to basically be the kind of central platform for tracking all the inflows and outflows of the dollars the business owner is making, all the way down to their personal life, right? And so I think that's really powerful, where what could happen if a traditional kind of business owner doesn't no longer need to think about finance. And so all they think about is, closing more business, making their business better, hiring people, etc., and kind of leave all the boring stuff to technology. And so I think, that's a really sort of powerful thing to say. And if you zoom out and if you think about, the American dream, right, where entrepreneurs want to start a business and become successful and achieve financial freedom and, truly build something great, there's so many barriers that come in their way. And one of the barriers is sort of all the stuff around finance, capital, managing, accounting, taxes, all the boring stuff. Could we get rid of all of that so that business owners can focus on what they're good at?
Yeah, and most business owners don't have the knowledge of all of that, and usually rely on someone else, and sometimes get in trouble because they're not well informed. So I think that gives them that safety net, and also some level of trust.
So Zaid, you started Flexbase June 2020, right as the pandemic was in the thick of it. How did that help, hurt? What was that experience like?
Yeah, no. So we like to say that we were a COVID sort of first sort of work setup, where because we started in COVID, we had no choice but to design our infrastructure and kind of our collaboration tools for a work from home remote company, right? And so we initially started by recruiting people all over the country. We now are consolidating in a few cities to kind of have a hybrid experience. But it's amazing what happens when you're forced to communicate precisely from day one, right? Because the reality is, a friend of ours says this often, where every single company that's successful eventually becomes a remote company, right? Any company you can think of, Apple, Microsoft, Google, they eventually all become remote companies because you're spread out in so many different offices and cities. And so you just need tools from day one to actually foresee that. And so by starting in COVID, being a remote first company, we were able to sort of get very good at asynchronous communication, hiring people who know how to communicate really, really well and diligently, have tools to sort of remind people to stay on top of things, and also, invest in stuff like virtual offices. We use a product called Roam, which is a Miami-based company that is doing pretty phenomenally, that literally gives you a virtual office that your colleagues can jump in and out of. So you feel like you're in a real work environment while you're not. And more stuff like that that's been very significantly helpful for our sort of collaboration tools.
So I want to kind of jump into now your angel, the 305 Ventures. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I don't
Yeah.
want you to skip the beat on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've been investing for a very long time. I used to live in San Francisco, and so initially I used to write a lot of $10,000 checks. Was lucky to have been part of a few success stories. And so when I moved to San Francisco, when I moved to Miami from San Francisco, one of my close friends, a guy named Joey Levy, who Maria knows really well, he's also a Thiel Fellow. Him and I were both sort of angel investing on our own. And we were like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we actually like band together and have sort of a vehicle where we could invest in people? And wouldn't it be cool if we called it 305 Ventures, right? Just as sort of a placeholder name, just see what happens. And initially, it was supposed to be just our own capital, no intention of it being anything big or anything like that. And that has just taken off with Miami becoming super big. 305 kind of has sort of gone through that wave, and we've invested in a bunch of companies in the last 2 years. Deployed in the sort of eight-figure AUM now, and so that number keeps growing. But it's all sort of just us sort of acting as almost like super angels, where founders kind of know what other good founders look like, and so can we as founders be on the same side of the table and sort of try to help each other out? And so it's been very much a community-driven approach. And I do a lot of stuff in fintech and AI. Joey, he started a company called Better with Jake Paul. And so he's big in consumer gaming. And so he does a lot of stuff in gaming and consumer kind of apps in general. And so it's been awesome to be part of the Miami sort of tech community and try to sort of help seed the ecosystem.
So you said that you guys invest in other founders. Like, what are some of the key attributes that you look for in a founder when you guys are going to put money behind them?
What's interesting is, let's kind of flip that question around. What's an attribute we have seen in founders or companies that have not worked out? And so because we've been doing this for a while, we've seen a few failures. And I think, the thing that most people don't say is that most of these failures happen because the founder gave up, they ran out of money, or the founder was just not persistent enough. Because if you're willing to like be resourceful and like super persistent, there is a chance that things will work out. And so it really comes down to persistence and grit is what we have found as sort of the core sort of commonality in all the companies that have succeeded and not succeeded at the same time, right? And so that's something that we really spend a lot of time and attention on. We have a friend that says that you pretty much as an investor don't need to do anything but find superhumans. The controversial thing to say is that 90% of VCs don't add any value. Maria, you're not included. you do add value, but 90% of VCs add zero value to the table, right? And so what you as an investor should really focus your time on is finding incredible founders and trying to sort of force multiply their way, as opposed to getting in their way, right? And so oftentimes you'll find investors who want to add value but become sort of annoying because they're trying to be they're trying to run the business rather than be an enabler for business, right? And so we try to sort of find these superhuman founders and sort of just try to force multiply behind the scenes. And that can come in all sorts of ways, but ultimately it's the founder doing 99.99% of the job, and that job is really, really fucking hard, and it requires quite a bit of persistence.
What have you found to be some of the biggest challenges in, this isn't your first rodeo, you've launched businesses before, but yeah, what are some of the big learnings that you could, if you want to impart on other founders listening?
Yeah. I think the big learnings, let me think about that for a second. I think ultimately building a successful company comes down to a very simple formula: good team, good market, product market fit, right? There's like an adage that Mark Andreessen has that if you have a bad team in a great market, it's going to fail. If you have a great team in a bad market, it's also going to fail. So you kind of need a great team and a great market and achieve true product market fit to actually build a super successful company. Whenever you hear, founders fighting with each other, politics at a startup, some like issue, 9 out of 10 times it's because that company actually has no real traction, or the traction has plateaued and is slowing down, and it's causing all sorts of second, third order effects at the company. And so, we have been, now that this is sort of my second or third time, depending on how you look at it, from day one, we asked ourselves, like, what is it that the customer actually wants? Do they want like a Ferrari? Do they want something that like pays their bill? Do they want, a tool that they use every single day? Do they want a tool that they use, once a month? There are a lot of these kind of product decisions that founders sometimes don't make the correct way because they're not talking to their customers. And so by being very obsessed on achieving true product market fit, you can avoid a lot of these pitfalls. And so that's been, I think, one major difference in my approach at this company, where I spend maybe half my time thinking about customers.
Life as a single founder, I know a lot of times VCs want to invest in co-founders. It can't be easy. What is that like? And have you thought about bringing in a co-founder? Or you're like, no, I'm good. Like, I just want to build.
Yeah, so at Flexbase, I do have a co-founder, and I've tried the solo founder thing in the past, and I generally discourage people from doing that. I like to pair with someone who actually is very operationally focused on the execution parts of the business, and I kind of do all the foundering, if you will, like go and like raise the money and like do these types of things and so on, and just keep all the distractions away from the team. Because you do need someone on the team that's like just focused on, what's going to happen today, what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And then you also need someone who's able to sort of think at a 30,000 feet level. And so there's, having the right kind of yin and yang in that kind of structure is why, 90% of the most successful companies in the world tend to be more than one founder. I mean, you can do it if you're a solo founder, but it's just going to be super duper hard and very lonely.
So Zaid, you've been in Miami, what, 2 years now? 2.5 years?
Yeah.
So what's like, Miami has a weird culture. Like I always say this all the time, and it's because it's such a mixture of so many different cultures and the best and worst of all of them, right? But I'm curious, what's been the most sort of like culture shock type thing that's happened to you since, or that you've experienced since coming here and moving here?
Yeah. So I'm like really passionate about the subject. So I moved from Dubai.
Well, I'm glad I asked it.
Yeah. So I mean, if you just look at my life, right? So I grew up in Dubai, and Dubai is generally regarded as, innovation focused, growth mindset, like make crazy things happen kind of city, to San Francisco, where, I thought I was going to an even more crazy sort of innovation centric place. But it was actually, completely orthogonal to that. You have the sort of tech community and tech VCs are talking about, changing the world, but then you have a city that really, really hates change. In fact, they hate change so much that they're willing to, derail any project that comes their way that changes even one aspect of their living. And so, one of my favorite kind of moments was there was a big real estate developer that wanted to build a 50-story building in downtown San Francisco next to my place where I lived for 6 years in SF. And, there was a huge protest one day on our block. I was wondering, what is this protest about? Is this about some like very specific rights or something like that? No, it was because this new development would have a shadow over the water in the bay that would ruin the aesthetics of the water. And that project ultimately did not get approved. And so I think, coming to Miami, it's been such a breath of fresh air. You have a great mayor here who's really driven by, innovation and enforcing the law, which, is kind of a crazy thing to say, but, it actually does matter. And focusing on, bringing the best people here, right? And so the level of optimism and happiness that I feel in Miami is like literally night and day from my time in the Bay Area.
On that note, actually, one question. This will probably air in a week or two, but, we're coming off the heels of another MiamiTech week. The excitement continues. The madness continues. I feel like everyone, each week, each year has a different, vibe. Last year made more heavy in crypto. This year, I'm curious to get your perspective on how you've seen the last few MiamiTech weeks play out. I know you guys always host incredible events. So thoughts on maybe even just this year versus last year?
Yeah, no, I think so. This is my third MiamiTech week, right? The first one was kind of like, it was sort of like, hey, Miami's a thing. You should pay attention to it, right? The second one was, oh my God, we're at peak bull market. Like all these crypto bros throwing like crazy, $300,000 parties, just like insane kind of Miami-ness, almost like a negative connotation, because the true builders in Miami get hidden by some of the flashiness that tourists bring to this town, right? And yeah, it was quite literally companies from New York and LA coming to town and just like hiring these event companies to do crazy extravaganzas. And then this year was much more sort of, hey, MiamiTech is here to stay. We're building something that is long term, and the emphasis was really on quality conversations. And so I think at our events, last year we maybe saw like, I don't know, 2,200 people RSVP. This year we saw like maybe a 40 to 50% decrease. But, we saw that the quality of people was probably 2 to 3x higher in aggregate. And so even though the quantity of people this year was lower, the quality was on an absolute basis higher, right? And so I think that is the exact right trend line. The one example I give to my friends in SF is that the thing that I like about Miami is that the interesting people who live here are sort of, it's almost like the 1% of our friend groups from SF and New York and whatnot got put on a bus, like the most interesting 1%, and shipped to Miami at the exact same moment. And so some of that was lost last year when it was like just a lot of quantity. And this year it kind of got back to the norm.
Yeah, I feel like I heard that from a lot of different people, that they felt like it was much higher quality this time, and people who are actually building here versus just flying in for a crazy week.
Yeah. Well, and I think it continues. Like, it's not, MiamiTech month anymore. Well, it started with week, and then, week turned into month, and then Miami, us ambitious, turns into an event every other week. But even this Monday, the Built in Miami, program with Venture Miami and the Shrimp launched, and it was a Monday evening, and there were 100 people at the hub, 100 like founders at the hub. working. It was just impressive to see. So if there's ever like a doubt, is there people building here? We're not partying, they're working. There are builders in Miami. I think I love the identity of Miami in the sense that people, as much fun as we like to have, like we're go-getters as well. And I think that we exude that in energy too.
Yeah, I mean, like honestly, like this year, there was stuff like that we had the fortune of co-hosting the Miami Tech Week Demo Day, right? It was 15 incredible companies, and the sort of feedback was incredibly positive. Where most people were like, "Hey, we didn't even realize these founders existed in Miami," right? And so one of the things that a lot of kind of non-Miami VCs don't understand is that Miami has almost like an anti-adverse selection because a lot of the founders are second or third time founders. They often don't need seed stage VCs. They just go back to existing investors or folks that they've worked for a long time, or like Series A investors, and just go and raise very large rounds without much kind of hustle and bustle, such that a typical pre-seed or seed investor sitting in South Park SF has no idea what's going on, right? Until it's too late, right? And so I think that's another interesting element of the city.
I have a sort of semi counter argument to that it's not just second or third time investors or founders here. It's founders that have cash flow orientation as their primary orientation because of lack of available venture investments and stuff for so long here, right? Like there's so many investors or so many founders who come here and realize they need to build a business with solid fundamentals, otherwise they won't be able to survive, and they don't have the luxury of being able to chase growth at all costs, because all costs is their own house. It's like their own family eating, and so I think that's a different dynamic that's worth making sure we all make note of.
Yeah, building a real company, is back in fashion. And so
shocking. P&L statements? What's that? Since when is there a P in a P&L statement in a tech, right?
Yeah, it's always hilarious now when you see words like EBITDA and stuff like that. Our goal for the next 12 months is hit cash flow break even. That's like another kind of very common thing that you're seeing, right? So it's incredible. And I think to your point, before this Miami ecosystem came together in the last couple of years with a lot of kind of new talent here, the founders who have been here for a long time have always focused on cash, right? Because there was not a significant capital market here. And so I think that's really interesting.
Well, I know we're coming up on time. I want to thank you so much for joining. Last plug, how can people find you? Are you hiring? I know you mentioned any sales rock stars out there want to join this rocket ship.
Yeah. So we're hiring a ton of people in Miami around sales and marketing, so generally our growth team. And we're also hiring tons of engineers and product people as well all over the US. And so if you want to reach out to Zaid, that's ZAID at flexbase.app. And I'd be happy to talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And awesome. This has been episode 84 of the Miami Tech Pod. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, guys. Appreciate it.